it's really great. I know with the drying trend right now, temperatures are rising and all the forest fires, wildfires that are on the news, it's forefront of everyone's minds. And we're just fortunate to have Bruce here to share this FireSmart workshop with us and teach us how we can make our communities more resilient to forest fires. And yeah, we're really excited to host this for everyone. So thank you for attending tonight.
Thanks, Jeremy. Anya, is my screen shared properly?
Yeah, we can see your screen share. Thanks so much.
Good evening, everyone. And I share Jeremy's welcome. My name is Bruce Blackwell. I'm a professional forester, a professional biologist, and I've been working in this space for about 33 years. I've done all things fire. I've been responsible for the Community Wildfire Protection Plan for West Van, North Van, the city of North Van. So tonight, we're going to talk about FireSmart, which hopefully will provide you with some information about protecting your own home from wildfire. And I think I don't want people to become alarmed by the presentation tonight. It's great that everybody's attending because it is difficult to get people out to these workshops, and it seems that when we get the most attendance is when things are the driest and people are worried about fire. There are many things that you can do or think about on your property as it relates to protecting it from fire, and hopefully you'll come away with some thoughts on what you can apply to your own property after this evening. So the outline of tonight's presentation, how does wildfire risk affect West Vancouver and the North Shore? We're going to talk about wildfire risk and behavior, just in general. How do we define it? What is it? We'll move into the principles of FireSmart, which are focused on FireSmart construction, FireSmart priority zones around your home, landscaping, preparedness, and how FireSmart can be broadened within the community. So how does wildfire risk affect West Vancouver and the North Shore? Well, when I started doing work on the North Shore back in about 2006, I would have said that the fire risk was largely low to moderate. We didn't have a lot of lightning. There weren't a lot of human-caused fires, even though we had a pretty expansive interface. But the issue is that we have significant consequence if we do have a fire. We have billions of dollars in terms of real estate value, infrastructure, public safety issues. So it's that probability may be low to moderate, but the consequences are high. And I think the thing that I've seen through my career, particularly over the last 20 years, is there's been a substantial change in that risk profile. And really, we've seen fires in 2003, 2009, 15, 17, 18, and now probably the worst fire season that I've been involved in or witnessed is this year. We're in August conditions right here in July. We've had no significant rain. I think it's now close to 50 days. And we've been in what I'll call a regional drought that started in March. All of our precipitation levels are about 30% of what they historically are March through July. And I think as of today, we're in a period of extreme fire risk. And if we were to have a fire on the North Shore, it has the potential to grow quickly and accelerate and become uncontrollable given the conditions that we're in right now. And the losses that we've seen in other jurisdictions and the current climate that we have here suggest that we need to be doing more than we presently are. And while the fire department and the municipality has been really preparing this for a long time, preparing for these kind of events for a long time, it's really important for individual residents to recognize that they need to do some things to contribute to this risk reduction or protecting their own property. We have had a couple of interesting fires. The Strip Creek fire near Horseshoe Bay in 2019, and this year there was a human-caused fire at Sewell's Marina that was human-caused and caused some damage and was difficult to control, and that was in May. Very unusual for us to have a substantive fire in May on the coast, but the last couple of years, because it's been dry in the spring, we saw a significant fire in Squamish that affected hydro infrastructure, and we've had some fires locally. So what areas are likely to be affected? Well, we talk about intermix, and those are islands of homes that are embedded in the forest, and you can see those in the top of the slide. And then we talk about the edge of the forest that meets the community, and we define that as the interface. And what we're really interested in is not necessarily flames lapping up at your home, but we're concerned about spot fire risk or ember showers, as they're sometimes described. And that's where the forest is burning. It puts up embers into the smoke column. They're carried at a distance, depending on wind, depending on the fuel type, and they land on substances or surfaces that can be ignited, whether that's grass, whether that's wood roofing, or whether that's a wood pile that's underneath your deck. Any of those kinds of surfaces has the potential for an ember to start on fire. And I think the other thing we're concerned about is that fire can move from an individual property at a house fire level or a small fire on a home into the wildland forest, but fire can also move from the wildland into the community. So fire comes two ways. I actually think on the North Shore, it's much more likely that we're going to have some form of house fire or human-caused fire that's going to move into the broader forest landscape and cause us some more problems. So I think that's the way we should be thinking about it. And here's just a couple of examples of that intermix and interface forest mixed in with homes. And you can see lots of homes, homes right down to the water. And I can tell you that the spot fires, the ember fire, if it was the slope above, would likely rain down right to the water in this picture. So West Van has a considerable interface. It's dispersed, it's not contiguous, but there definitely is the potential for either a house to catch on fire and spread into the forest, or, as I said, a fire upslope moving down into the community that was wind driven. As part of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, we did an evaluation of local fire behavior and threat, which is sort of mandated by the province as part of this process. So you can see most of West Van is moderate, but there are pockets of high and extreme fire risk as it relates to the community. So when we think about, I think I've already mentioned the consequence side, and I talked a little bit about probability, but really once you have a high consequence and some form of probability, you need to be thinking about how you're going to manage that risk profile and what are you going to do about it. And ultimately, we need to make changes as we see this climate shifting to these longer, drier springs and higher temperatures, which are no question dramatically increasing the periodicity when we can have a fire. So historically, maybe we were in high or extreme danger days around 34 days. We're now seeing that rise above 60. So the chance of ignition is going up. And here's just an overview of that spotting that I described earlier. You've got trees on fire on the left. You've got orange embers that are being carried by the wind out of the smoke column. And where they are within that orange bar that you can see, they'll start a fire. When they're outside of that orange bar, they won't start a fire. That orange and gray bar will move further away from the fire as the wind speed increases. So if we have a 35-kilometer wind or a 40-kilometer wind, we can have spotting that's well in excess of 2 kilometers and up to 5 kilometers. And in Australia, where they have a more volatile fuel type, spotting has been measured in eucalypt at 25 kilometers. So these embers can be carried long distances, and they can still be alight and still start fires quite a ways ahead of that fire front. And this is just some pictures to show you how homes are ignited. This is a classic picture of a forest fire generating an ember shower. That ember shower rains down on the home, and the home is ignited, and a fire started in the home. So you can have it firebrand or ember caused ignition, or you can have this vegetation to structure. So where the vegetation is really close to the structure, it can cause the structure to start on fire. And when you've got a neighborhood of structures, what happens is once we have multiple homes on fire, the fire department is really set up to generally fight structural fires in the order of 1, 2, and their maximum capability would probably be about 4. And Jeremy can correct me if I'm wrong later, but they're overwhelmed fairly quickly when they have multiple homes on fire. So when we start seeing those numbers go above 2, 3, 4, the fire department is overwhelmed, and you get house-to-house contact in these ember shower conditions or these multiple home ignitions. So I'm going to show a video that kind of emphasizes what I'm talking about here, and then we'll come back to the PowerPoint in just a minute. So I gotta just let's just see. I've got it. Bear with me for a minute. This always is a technical issue because I've got to share a different screen, and I don't know if I got it. Nope, I didn't get it. Bear with me again. Okay, I'll stop that, and I'm just going to close that. There we go. So here we go. So can you all see this video? I believe you can. And so this is a simulation of an ember shower in a laboratory, and this is done by the Insurance Bureau in the US. And you can see the home. It's got different roofing material, vegetation, so that they load a combustible mix of bark, mulch, and wood into a burning chamber, generates embers. And you're going to see an array of fans that blow this burning material onto the home. And the idea is that they're testing which materials will burn, which ones won't. And it's really interesting to understand the ignition dynamics here. And I'll just let the video go, and much of what I'll talk about after is preventing these types of ignitions. But you can see here we got vinyl siding. There's hardy board, which is resistant to fire. Vinyl siding is not. You've got a wood roof, which is vulnerable to fire. You've got a duroid roof, which is not vulnerable to fire. And you're going to see different parts of this home start on fire based on this ember shower. So it's an 100 array of fans with a wind speed of approximately 10 to 20 miles an hour, which really are not extreme conditions. And you can see that ember shower, and this is what a real ember shower would look like. And you can see it alighting on different parts. You can see the landscaping, the vinyl gutters start on fire. The aluminum gutters won't burn, the vinyl gutters will melt. And you'll see that in a second. So you see the landscaping is completely on fire. You can see the gutter melt, and you can see the Class A rated roofing not burning, but you can also see material that was left on the roof. Vegetation material starts on fire in the eave here. You can see a lot of stuff that was vulnerable. So if you have trees hanging over your house, you're going to deposit that material. It's going to start on fire, and if you don't have rated roofing, it's going to burn into your roof fairly quickly. The untreated shake roof actually starts on fire, and you can see that right here. And it'll get worse. You can see the vinyl siding is melting. The hardy board on the left is not. You can see that in the indented corners, the fire starts to move up the flammable wood lap siding and really take off, whereas you're not seeing that with the hardy board. And you're going to use, so the hardy board, that fiber cement siding is not being burned. The vinyl siding was melted away. You saw that. And now you're going to see that embers are going to get into the attic of this home because it's not properly screened. So there's a fairly open screen that's going to allow embers to get in the attic and start the interior of the house on fire. You're also going to see fire come through that window. So there's recommendations about proper screen size to stop embers from penetrating the inside of your house. So you can see they start to blow in here. If you've got insulation or they land in the wrong part of corners of the inside of the home, this is usually a very dry environment, very warm in these conditions, and it's easily to start a fire. Here you're going to see a single pane window and fire moving into the living area. And you can imagine a couch here or curtains would start on fire, and the interior of the house would be on fire. So these are places that fire can enter the home if not properly prepared for an event such as this. And that concludes the video. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint. Bear with me for a minute. And be able to share this again. And from current slide, there we go. And so this is an example of what happened in Fort McMurray in 2015. And this was a FireSmart assessment that occurred after the fire to try and learn why some homes burned and why some homes didn't. You can see most of the fire houses on the left-hand side burned, most of the ones on the right-hand side didn't. There was house-to-house contact here, largely because there was a lot of vegetation planted right up against the house. And there were trees and vegetation that burned, as you can see, that also facilitated embers moving between the homes. Multiple homes started on fire, and those homes on the left burned. The ones on the right, you don't see a lot of vegetation in their yards. Where you do, it's deciduous. They've got green lawns. You can see there's not necessarily a lot of vegetation right up against the house. And so one of the things that came out of this was there was a new zone created in FireSmart. There are 3 zones, and I'll talk about them later. But there was what was developed was a 1A zone, which means anywhere 1.5 meters from the base of the house needs to be non-flammable. Many people plant vegetation, and you saw it in the video, that starts the side of the house on fire because it burns. So whether it's a gravel area around the house or non-flammable vegetation, you need to focus on not having vegetation too close to your house because it really makes your home vulnerable in these conditions of an interface fire. So we'll talk about FireSmart and what you as a homeowner, and I recognize that many of you live in a built-out area and changing things is more difficult. But what I try to say is, you know, your roofing is probably the most important part of your home as it relates to FireSmart. If you have an unrated roof, one that is wood or has wood built into it, when you re-roof, I would roof with a Class A roofing product and change your roof. And shakes is really the biggest focus, but there are other materials that are vulnerable. So in Canada, FireSmart leads basically the development of resources and programs around FireSmart. It's based on good science. The US has a similar program called FireWise, and there is a BC website called FireSmart BC, or you can go to westvancouver.ca and they have a link to FireSmart. So all of the things that I'm talking about, there's more material and more information for you to review and integrate into your thought process as it relates to trying to protect your home from an interface fire. The objectives of FireSmart are really to help communities in the wildland interface reduce the risk of wildfire, to assist communities to adapt to wildfires and become more resilient. And really by using these principles, you can take steps to reduce the probability of a fast-moving fire from a forest to a building or spreading from building to the forest, which we talked about earlier. And I don't know how many of you watched the news tonight. There was a global footage of a couple and a trailer park owner and they lost everything in the fire. And they, just looking at the trees around their property, just looking at the property that was already burned, I could tell that they weren't even close to being fire smart. And unfortunately, it took the fire about 5 minutes from when it was first spotted to move onto the property and actually start the structures on fire. So these fires are incredibly hot, they move incredibly quickly, and it's not something you're going to have time to deal with if you're not prepared ahead of it. Why don't more people focus on implementing FireSmart on their property? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. One is awareness of the actual risk, lack of engagement with the public. There are cost barriers for some people. What do we do with the fuel and the biomass that has to be disposed of that's on the property? There are perceived actions required to be fire smart that not everybody necessarily buys into. As I said, a home may have been constructed by materials that aren't fire smart, and changing those at this point become problematic. And there's a lack of funding opportunities to do the kind of work necessary here. So really, some of the key aspects of FireSmart are really simple. One of them is, if you have materials that are flammable next to your home, you want to remove them. And ideally, you remove them out of the priority zone 1, which is 10 meters away from the home. That's 30 feet around the home. The other key thing is the vegetation type, and I'll talk about some of that as we move through the presentation. But you really want a non-flammable vegetation cover in that 10-meter zone, and you don't want things that are vulnerable to fire growing right up next to your house. So the construction, I think the video highlighted some of the key construction features that we'd like to see in FireSmart homes. Obviously, resistant roofing material, and I can say that a fellow named Cohen, who's retired now, that did all the research around a lot of this stuff initially, found that 85% of homes that had rated roofing survived an ember shower. Obviously, doing things like improving your siding, making your siding fire resistant, using decking materials that are fire resistant, closing those spaces under stairs and decks. So fire comes uphill often. Many people their decks are open and unsheathed, and they have material that will burn. Good to close those decks up, even if you just use 1/8 plywood or something to stop the embers from getting in. You saw how embers get into the attic and into the vents. Ideally, those are screened with 3mm screens. Having tempered double glazed windows as a minimum. Another way of making sure your home's protected, and you want to close off the eaves with fire resistant soffits. So those are kind of the key principles, but there's many other recommendations around structures, and you can go to the materials that I've referenced in the presentation. Here's some examples of people that have used a lot of wood, and after the fact, they thought about FireSmart, and they've been advised to incorporate some form of retardant material. I don't recommend this. These retardants on wood generally just are resins that fill the pores of the wood, and over time it decomposes. They're not CSA rated, and generally speaking, this type of material over a 5 to 7 year period will be vulnerable to some of the burning conditions that we talked about. These are some types of materials that are not vulnerable to fire, are not going to carry fire. You can see hardy board, you can see stone, you've got rated roofing. And so you're seeing more and more homes that are built in the interface. If you go to the Okanagan now, many of them look like this. The standard around construction in the Okanagan, for example, is very much moving to this type of material to make the homes less vulnerable to fire. That still hasn't stopped people from managing their vegetation, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So again, propane tanks, wood piles, anything that's flammable that's close to your house should be removed, and it also should be marked if it's flammable or it's hazardous, just because the fire service, we want to keep them safe, and a lot of people store crazy things. I heard a story recently about somebody that had ammunition in their garage. The garage caught on fire, and then that ammunition started to explode during the fire. Lots of people hold propane tanks too close to their house, either right next to it. These things are bombs in an interface event. And so ideally, if you can store them in a safe place away from the structure, that's the best bet. And or label them or make that information available to somebody that comes to your home as a first responder. We'll talk about priority zones. I mentioned earlier that we have this non-combustible zone that's 0 to 1.5 meters around the base of your house. The priority zone, the 1.5 to 10 meters, those are the two I'm going to focus most. This FireSmart, a lot of it was developed for rural properties. So if you have a property where the forest or your property is large and it extends out, then you start looking at 10 to 30 meters and 30 to 100 meters. But in West Van, really, we're trying to focus on this 10 meter zone or 30 foot zone where we want to limit the potential for ignitions and the home, parts of the home starting on fire. So the 10 meter zone in this example is the red circle. The priority zone 1.5 is not on this particular example, but you can see if you've got a large forested lot, you want to be thinking about moving some of the principles of what I'll talk about out further into your property. But we want to start with that immediate area. You can see here in the 1.5 meter zone, the steps and underneath the home are largely mineral soil and or rock. The one thing I don't like about this home is that fire can come up the slope and get underneath the decking here and start this home on fire. This is not FireSmart material. You can see it's mostly wood siding. It's embedded in the house. You've got trees overhanging the roof. This fire would have a very low probability of surviving an interface fire. The other part of it is that because there's so much fuel around the building, the fire department would have limited to no chance of saving this if the forest was on fire. And in many circumstances where there's multiple homes on fire, it's kind of likely that the fire department would prioritize those houses that are in better shape. So that 10 meter fuel-free zone, you want to ensure that you can't have direct flame contact with the building. You want to reduce the potential for radiative heat. And why do we use 10 meters? It takes about 30 feet when you have these high temperatures that are generated in forests, roughly about 900 degrees C, to dissipate where that radiant heat won't start the structure on fire. In that 10 meter zone, you want to avoid coniferous vegetation, and that includes shrub species like cedar, like juniper, or even yew. You don't want to use bark mulch immediately next to the home. And as I said, you don't want to store flammable material in the same area. Where you have accumulations of down woody material, ideally you want to remove it, especially the fine material that's less than 6 inches. It's what spreads the fire. You ideally want to raise the tree crowns to a height of 2 meters to prevent fire from moving from the ground into the tree. And you may even decide to thin the forest out a little bit so that you don't have tree-to-tree contact. I will say something, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but there is a forest health problem on the North Shore right now. It's a hemlock looper outbreak, and it is killing hemlock. And in combination with the drought, I expect many people's properties to have dead trees on them. Ideally, you want to remove that dead tree and start, or at least start thinking about cleaning up the fine debris that's going to come down after that tree starts to rot over the next couple of years, because it's going to create a surface fire hazard if it's close to the house. Here's another example of some fine debris right next to a trail. So obviously that 10 meter zone, 30 foot zone, you don't want these kinds of accumulations, which often occur where trees shred their branches over time and fuel collects. So you want to clean up that surface fuel. You want to prune those trees to take the branches that carry fire up into the trees. And if necessary, you want to space out the trees so there's not tree-to-tree contact. Landscaping. Probably the thing that you have the most influence on many of your homes. I talked about cedar hedges. Cedar hedges are extremely flammable. They have a lot of what we call volatiles. Their resins and their chemical makeup are very flammable. And people say, well, I irrigate mine. Well, if you've ever stuck your hand into the middle of a cedar hedge, regardless of whether it's irrigated or not, it's generally very dry. It's got dead material. That material starts on fire, and then the whole hedge goes up. And where these touch the house, where these are conduits across the yard that fire can move from the front of the yard to the back of the yard, they make firefighting extremely difficult in some of these conditions that we're talking about. This is an example of a wildfire spreading in California. We've seen this in the interior of BC. So really you want to limit this kind of landscaping, particularly against your home. Here's some other examples of other species. Juniper, if you've ever seen it burn, is like a bomb going off. Lot of chemistry there that propagates fire. We've got yew on the left-hand side, cedar hedging, and spruce. These coniferous types of vegetation next to homes that we commonly use for landscaping are hazardous in these wildfire events. So if you can get them away from your home, get them trimmed back as low as possible if you have a significant hedge, that's going to provide better protection for your home. Much better to have non-flammable vegetation if possible. And here's some examples. These have high foliar moisture contents. They don't have the extractives that those other woody material have. And essentially, these are not going to burn very easily, and they're not going to propagate fire across your properties like some of those other examples I just previously showed you. So what we want to do is make sure that we do the necessary fuel management in that 10-meter zone, so that if embers land in that zone, they're not going to start woody debris on fire, and they're not going to move the fire closer to your house and make it more difficult for the fire service to put out that fire. And also to keep the fire service safe when they're entering the property or they're working around your home. So you want to think about that pruning issue, the removal of that flammable debris on the ground. If you have dense conifers, you may want to think about thinning some of them. And ideally, you want to create a fuel break or a fire break, particularly at the slope break if you're on a significant slope, because fire runs very quickly up a slope and tends to preheat the fuels faster and make that upper slope more vulnerable to carrying the fire. Here's some examples of thinning some properties in different parts of BC. You can see this very high cedar component in the understory and thinned out what it looks like without all that fuel. This would, on the left-hand side, would carry a fire right up into the crowns, would be very difficult to deal with. And it's contiguous horizontal and vertical fuel. And so any of our conifer fuels that become both horizontally and vertically integrated are going to cause problems for fire behavior if a fire starts there. So we talk about crown raising. You can see this crown is still too close to the roof of the home. If the home started on fire, it would move fire into the tree. And if the tree started on fire from contact with the distribution hydro lines, it could start the house on fire. So trying to keep tree cover off your roof is important. Pruning allows retention of some of these trees so that fire won't move so easily up the tree trunk. But if you do have a large tree, a specimen tree that you want to keep on your property, I always recommend that you prune it 2 meters from the ground, and ideally you get that crown 5 meters up above the roof line if possible. That's just a minimum. In terms of property maintenance, we want to keep grasses short, so and you don't want a lot of dead grass to accumulate. You keep your roof and gutter clean of tree debris or vegetation. You don't want to allow leaf litter to accumulate like you saw in the video, where they become sort of little campfires on your roof. You want to make sure that that conifer base height is up at 2 meters. You want to remove or thin conifer seedlings as they pop up. And you don't want a lot of needles and dead branches to build up in that 10-meter zone that we talked about. And ultimately use that curbside pickup for yard trimmings. And there's a reference to that for your West Vancouver green can. Sorry, I'm getting a little parched. So again, here's some different things. Here's some non-flammable vegetation on the right. You can see there's quite a bit of vegetation, but imagine embers landing on this. High foliar moisture content, it's not going to start on fire. Interesting, this individual here in the center top thought he'd done a really good job of fire smarting his property and was really proud to walk us around the property. Well, his deck wasn't sheeted. Embers can get underneath that deck. Largely a wood structure. He had propane tanks right up against the building on the left-hand side, several propane tanks, and they were plumbed right into the house right in that spot, so they were a hazard. But he did a lot of things well. Had the trees spaced well. Most of the surface around the home was not vulnerable to embers. And the roof was not vulnerable to embers. And you can see the backyard here. He had some non-flammable vegetation right up against the house. But again, he took some steps to improve the property's risk of fire affecting it. Here's some recently constructed homes in both North Van and West Van on the left and in the center. You can see these are largely built with FireSmart materials. You can see the landscaping is not favorable to fire, like I've discussed. Very few conifers. Conifers are away from the house. This example on the right is from Saturna Island, and it was a really interesting one because this individual went to great lengths to make this house fire smart, put a sprinkler system on the roof, used hardy board, used a non-flammable roofing. The soffits were all closed, but they made a critical error. They cleared all the vegetation from around the home and let it turn to grass. Grass rapidly spreads fire, will spawn as far as 20 or 30 meters. This is his cistern underneath the deck to hold water to service his sprinkler system. Fire would have traveled right underneath this deck, started the deck on fire, and who knows where it would have gone from there. This should have been sheathed in. There shouldn't have been the promotion of so much grass, or this grass should have been mowed and kept down, and the cistern probably should have been located at the back or at the side of the house. So this individual probably spent $25,000 to $30,000 trying to make their house fire safe, but they missed a few key critical elements that would have rounded this off a lot more nicely. What about emergency preparedness? Well, you've heard a lot about that in the news with these fires in the interior. Where you have a lot of tree cover around your home, and if there's a concern that your access may be blocked during a fire, you may want to consider investing in a simple sprinkler system. You can purchase a small pump, sprinkler hardware, and pretty much sprinkle most large houses for between $1,500 and $2,500. Couple of considerations: one, that you have enough fuel to run the pump and leave it for 4 to 6 hours. Two, if your water supply depends on electricity, you may want to think alternatives. So if you've again watched the news in recent weeks, many of the fires in the interior, particularly people in the Cariboo, have installed sprinklers next to lakes and things. Probably not. I don't expect a lot of people in West Van are going to use this technique, but I can say that we have some homes in North Van down Panorama Drive that has a very steep access, very difficult for the fire department to get down there. If they're building new homes there, they must sprinkle the exterior of their house. So if you feel there's any concern about that access for the fire department, that it could be blocked, or you want to be independent and you want to keep your forest a little bit closer to your house, this is another possible proactive measure to mitigate. What you're trying to do is create a humidity bubble around your house so that when those embers rain down, they enter the humidity bubble and extinguish. And that's going to stop them from alighting on the rooftop near to that vulnerable surface, and they won't likely start a fire. So the other thing is, there is an alert system in North Vancouver, NOCIMO. You can sign up, and if there is a wildfire event or other environmental emergency, you will get a text to let you know. You should have fire extinguishers, particularly if you have a barbecue or a deck that's close to the forest. It's a must. Ideally, you have an emergency contact list. You may think about, if you've got a larger forested property, having a water cistern, pump, and a hose. And you should have an emergency plan. And you're seeing a lot of people in the interior that are really frustrated with these evacuation orders and alerts because they don't have enough time to get their personal belongings together and get out of the property. If you live in a forested community, regardless whether you're on the coast or you're in the interior, I would be prepared for a fire. A simple house fire within 1 or 2 or 3 houses of yours could cause a bigger event, and you could be asked to evacuate. So, and any house fire, it's good to have this organization and preparedness. Pets, if you've got pets, you want to think about a plan for your pets. Obviously, if you are asked to evacuate, you want to close all windows and doors. If you do have any gas, propane, natural gas, you want to close the valves. If you do have propane tanks for your barbecue, you want to try and move those away from the structure. Move vehicles from the structure. Ideally, move patio furniture or flammable debris 10 meters from the structure. You can consider sprinklers. And really, I don't recommend anybody personally, from a safety point of view, tackling anything larger than the campfire, because the radiant heat and the rate at which these fires spread under these current conditions, it's not safe to be thinking about trying to be a hero and put out that fire. Leave it for the professionals. I'll talk about one other thing. I know there's some neighborhoods in West Vancouver that have been talking and are interested in becoming FireSmart communities, and that's lobbying the neighborhood to collectively do these things, get recognition, receive grants. And if you're interested in those kind of things, I would recommend that you speak with Chief Calder, and his contact information is going to be available as part of this presentation and on the website. Basically, what can you do? I think you can work on a lot of the things that I've talked about when you're thinking about the vegetation around your home, and potentially if you're changing your structure. You can become a local FireSmart workshop representative so that you can communicate these things out into your neighborhood. And you can work as a neighborhood to earn a FireSmart neighborhood recognition. So if you're interested in volunteering as a community champion to organize your neighborhood about FireSmart, again, there is on the FireSmart webpage, there's information about volunteering to become a community champion. And ultimately, once you gain recognition, or once you build this community plan, you start implementing it, you can become recognized as a FireSmart neighborhood. And that really encourages more people to get involved, more homes to be engaged, and really to communicate these principles. I find this recognition program is really good at getting the stubborn individuals who really don't want to do anything engaged in the program, because there's a lot of peer pressure and there's a lot of people sort of bearing the force of the program down on them to get that recognition. And it's a really good way to get everybody on board. And this is just details about the recognition program and how you get involved in it. And if you have questions related to FireSmart or related to tonight's presentation, you can contact Assistant Chief Calder at this phone number or email. And you're welcome to send inquiries to me if you have follow-up questions at our inquiries at VA Blackwell email. I'd be happy to entertain those.